We'll give it about 30 seconds before we get started. All right, let's get started. Thank you all for attending today. We're happy to have you here and hope you leave today's session with a better understanding of older adults. This is an event organized by the AIA Chicago's Design for Aging Knowledge Community. I am Drew Roscos. I am a co-chair of the Design for Aging group. I'm an architect and a gerontologist who works for Perkins Eastman, sitting in the Chicago office. Those of you who have attended DFA events in the past may be more familiar with the group's other co-chair, Heidi Wang, who is a partner at WJW. Our guest today is Dr. Widya Ramadhani. She recently completed her doctorate program in architecture at the University of Illinois. She is also a colleague of mine, sitting in the Perkins Eastman DC office. Today's discussion is a subject that encompasses her dissertation work. Before we get started, it's important to recognize our sponsors. Thank you to the companies and firms who support AIA Chicago at the highest level, our 1869 Circle partners. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Widya to cover today's subject.
Okay, thank you, Drew, for the introduction. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Let's get started. So good afternoon for those who are in my time zone. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, AIA Chicago Design for Aging, for inviting me to share about my dissertation research that I just completed. My name is Widya Ramadhani. I am now a design researcher at Perkins Eastman in the DC office. I'm going to be sharing some of the findings from my doctoral dissertation study. The full title of the study is Food-Related Activities Among Older Indonesian Women, Understanding Personal and Built Environmental Adaptation for Independence in Later Life. I would also like to note that I'm very grateful that this study was also funded by the AIA Design for Aging Fellowship, together with my colleague Drew, who got the fellowship in 2021-2022. So this is the outline of my presentation today. I'll start with a little bit of a research background, introducing my research questions, some of the framework that I use to approach this study, some of the methods, the characteristics of the participants, and then go to the meat, the beef of the presentation, which is the results, and we'll have some time for discussion and questions. Just a little warning that I have a lot of slides, some of which I will go through very quickly, but I'll be happy to go back during the question and answer session if you have some questions. So I'll start with the background of this study. This study looks at the intersection between these three areas, and I'm gonna go through it one by one in the next slides. Let's begin with aging in place in Indonesian cultural context. Aging in place experience is contextual, meaning that many factors influence them, including cultural values. Among Indonesians, family is the fundamental unit of the society. Indonesians are collectivists. What does it mean? Decisions are usually made jointly with other members of the group, in this case, family. There's also filial piety value, a two-way duty of care and responsibility between parents and children. There is a high reliance on kin availability and familial support for aging in place, as family is more likely to provide financial, social, physical, and emotional support. And one form of the support is co-residency with children, which is more common for women than men. Familial support can also go both ways. Many times, older adults are vital to the survival and welfare of the family because they can also provide support, such as financial and care support. And for the latter, care support is typically provided by older women. Talking about older Indonesian women, they're more vulnerable physically and socially. They live longer, but they have higher prevalence of disabilities. They're more likely to have 2 or more physical function limitations like walking, carrying heavy loads, bowing, squatting, and kneeling. and they have a higher incidence of inactivity compared to men, meaning that they have difficulty with or being unable to do one or more activities. They are also socially vulnerable, as they're usually expected to be responsible of domestic and caregiving tasks. They have fewer education years and less formal labor participation. So the combination of physical and social vulnerability of older Indonesian women poses more challenges to living and aging in place successfully. And in this study, I'm interested in looking deeply into older Indonesian women engagement in food-related activities. So food-related activities is commonly seen as women's work. They're also central to older women's health and ability to live independently. The domains of food-related activities can range from obtaining ingredients through shopping all the way to cleaning. And in this study, I'm looking at what's happening inside the house, which include preparing ingredients, cooking, eating, and cleaning. And then the 4 food-related activities represent different categories of activities of daily living. Eating is part of ADL because it's an essential activity for self-care. And then preparing ingredients, cooking, and cleaning are part of instrumental activities of daily living because those are important activities for maintaining independence to live without regular assistance. EADL, or enhanced activities of daily living, are activities that contribute to one's happiness, social engagement, sense of fulfillment, and well-being. While it may not be straightforward whether these activities can also be categorized as EADLs, this study aims to discover the relationship of one's food-related activities beyond the basic needs and necessities to understand their role in contributing to the overall well-being of older women. So my study fills in the gap in the scholarship by really understanding the relationship between these 3 core backgrounds: older Indonesian women's food-related activities when aging in place. So I'm introducing the overall study here. And again, because of the limited time, I only have time to kind of do a big brush on things, but I want to give an overall picture of the study. So I begin the study. The first part is looking at the context that influence food-related activities. So looking at how is it different in terms of those who live in Indonesia and those who live in the United States, and how is that difference manifested in the difference of settings. And then the next one, I look at the person and environment interaction. So the body and space interaction and how that create challenges and how that helps to adapt their strategies to adapt. And then the last one, looking at their impact to well-being. So despite the different changes and challenges, why are they doing what they're doing? So looking at the motivations and what does that mean to them? So this is the overall research questions. I'm not going to go through it right now. I will go in detail in the next couple minutes when I get into the results. I want to introduce the theoretical framework that I use when I constructed this study. So the first one is the person-environment interaction. It's the dialectic of balance between human competence and environmental support. And this is the graphical representation of person-environment interaction in the ecological theory of aging. So the x-axis is the environmental press and the y-axis is human competence. Basically, the goal is to be in the green zone when environmental press and human competence are balanced, resulting in an optimum adaptation level and positive effect. I also had a cultural lens to this study. I refer to the dismantling culture diagram by Rappaport to understand what is culture and how to observe culture in the environment. Rappaport dismantled culture into components and expressions that can easily be observed and studied. I focus on the horizontal part, so from left to right, where culture, an idea that's, it's general, it's abstract, is dismantled into a more specific expressions. And then in this study, I'm taking the furthest right, which is activity systems, as the most specific expression of culture. So I'm looking at the relationship of culture and environment by understanding and observing the specific attributes in the environment within the activity systems. So what is activity systems? It's also known as systems of activities. Basically, if we present a setting by a circle, we're not only concerned about the activities that are happening inside the circle, inside that setting. We're concerned with the systems of activities that occur in the systems of settings, so each activity is not a freestanding event. Systems of activities takes place in the systems of settings that comprise of 3 types of elements. The fixed feature elements include walls, doors, and other fixed elements. This is the semi-fixed feature elements, which is furniture, appliances, and other objects. And then there is non-fixed feature elements that are occupants and their behavior. And activities are linked by rules to what is appropriate and expected in the setting. So I'm using the theory of systems of activities and systems of settings and grounded on an activity-driven observation to comprehensively understand the dynamic and possibly overlapping multiple activities in the home environment. So this is what I use using those two frameworks, and this is how I develop my own framework, looking at person and environment are interacting with each other to conduct activity, and activity has certain demands to be fulfilled. The demands must be met by the person and environment interaction for optimum adaptation. So I'm not looking at activity as just one single isolated event, but as part of a series that are interrelated with each other, known as the systems of activities across time and space. Again, beyond those relationships between person, environment, and activity, the sociocultural context also influence the overall dynamics of the activity engagement. And this is the overall framework that I developed to answer the 3 research questions. Going into the method, I conducted this study in like 2020, 2021. So it was a virtual study. There were 2 types of data collection strategy that I did. Both are virtual, away from my participants. First, I asked participants to take photos and videos, elevation photos, supplemental photos, and walkthrough videos of their space where they do their food-related activities. So it really helps me to understand and get data about the physical environment where activities takes place. Following that, I set up an online interview session with them to understand the operation of food-related activities. So we look at the photos and videos together, so I get an idea about how the space is. I kind of draw a sketch about the floor plans, and then looking at how they're doing their activities and some background questionnaires. And I focus on the experience of social actors through constructive grounded theory. It really celebrates the subjectivity and involvement of the researcher. And then for participants, I had 25 older women, 60 years and older. I have 2 groups. 12 of them live in Indonesia their whole life. And then 13 are immigrants living in the United States. These participants, if I remember correctly, the shortest length of stay in the US is like 30 years. So we're looking at people who have lived in the US for a long time. The age is kind of, it's on the younger old group. So as you can see here, there's only 1 participant in the older old age group. In terms of marital status, 72% of them are married. The rest are either divorced, widowed, or single. They have a high level of education. All of them have at least high school graduate. In terms of employment status, 68% of them are not currently employed. But when I look at those who are not currently employed, 77% of them are retired. So we're really looking at women who used or still participating in the labor force. I'm not sure why that slide didn't work. But anyway, the left is the type of housing. So you can see that 68% of them live in a single family detached house. And then on the right, I'm not sure what happened, but this is saying that nobody live alone. So 40% live with a spouse or partner, 60% with family, 4% with roommate, and then another 40%, this dark brown one, is an aggregated of a combination of those 3. So no participants living alone. And then going into the results, the first one is the manifestations of food-related activities in the systems of settings. So the question was, what are the contexts that influence food-related activities of older Indonesian women? How is it different between those who live in Indonesia and those who live in the United States? And in what ways does context influence the manifestations of systems of setting in food-related activities? So if everyone remembered this graph that I was showing at the beginning, and then when I was starting to look at the data, I realized that the connection between these activities are not necessarily linear. So I developed this diagram, which does a better job in illustrating the connectivity between activities across 3 time points of the day. So the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. It also allows a representation of a routine or a cyclical routine that spreads across the day. So I'm gonna highlight some examples here. This one is participant IN12. So if it starts with IN, meaning that this participant lives in Indonesia their whole life. So you can see here that she eats 3 times a day and she only cooks in the afternoon, at the evening she's only eating. So what happened is once she's done eating, just dump it in the sink, and then she'll do the cleaning together in the morning. Another one example is US 12. So US means this participant live in the United States. And you can see some dots here. What does it mean? It means that this participant skipped the activities altogether in the morning and the afternoon. And she is only eating once a day. And she's not cleaning at all. Well, in her household, her husband is in charge of cleaning. So hence the line not touching the cleaning dot in the evening. So I hope everyone can kind of understand how I'm reading this diagram. So these are all the diagrams of systems of food-related activities. The left are all IN participants and the right are US participants. Something that I want to highlight, mornings are the busier time of the day for participants who live in Indonesia compared to US participants. These participants particularly have a busier morning compared to others. Then US participants engage in less series of food-related activities. Some even skip it altogether. Many of this happen during the daytime, especially for those who have daytime commitments, such as working or babysitting their grandchildren. These participants have gray lines, something that is not existing in IN participants. These participants don't engage in the same routine every day. Instead, these gray lines illustrate the days when they cook in a week, only certain days of the week. So some like, I only cook on Saturdays, or I only cook twice a week, and sometimes it changes. Again, this is due to work, childcare commitments, and also household size. So now we understand how is the systems of activities different, and then looking at how is the settings different. They're influenced by the physical context and also the social context. For physical context is the difference because of the connectivity between kitchen and dining room, and then the connectivity of the combination of kitchen and dining room with the front area of the residential units. And then social context can influence the systems of settings, for instance, the role, the responsibility, and participants' engagement in events or other types of engagements. I'm going to show you how it is. So first, I analyze how connected are the kitchen and the dining room in participants' house based on the types of connection. So it's either a fully connected kitchen and dining room, a pass-through connection, so it's like a window-size opening, a door connection, so those kitchen and dining room are separated by a door, and then room connection, meaning that there is like the kitchen and then other room, could be storage, it could be like, I don't know, random rooms, and then the dining room. So it's further separated. And then a fully connected kitchen and dining room really allows users or the people to have a concurrent and connected activities in 2 spaces. For instance, like one person cooks and then while the other one are eating in a dining room. They also allow visibility between actors in 2 spaces, encouraging interactions between them. Having less connectivity also means a lengthened travel distance, making kitchen a more secluded part of the house. So I found that US participants' house has higher kitchen and dining room connectivity than IN participants. There's no single US participant's house that has a kitchen and dining room separated by another room, which I found 2 among IN participants. Next, looking at the connectivity of kitchen and dining room together as a unit with the front area of the house, which I defined as the entrance, an area where guests are hosted. Again, there are 4 types of connections: wall without opening, wall with door, cased opening, and then no wall between those. The positioning of the kitchen and dining room in residential units can reveal the operationalization to maintain privacy or to establish inclusion between household members and guests. And this is the comparison of spatial relationships between IN and US participants group. IN residential units spread across the spectrum quite evenly. 2 houses with the highest connectivity actually have 2 kitchens, and at least one of the kitchens have no wall separating the kitchen and the front area. In contrast, not a single US participant's house rated as low. All of them has middle to high connectivity, meaning that the configuration of kitchens in the US participants' residential units is spatially closer and more connected to the front area where guests are present. Beyond the physical context, social context also changed the dynamics of activities and settings. This participant has a shop attached to her house. Her dining room is not just a setting for eating, but also for preparing ingredients and other non-food related activities. But she can hear what happens in the shop when a customer comes. So she really appreciates the adjacency of space that supports her role as a shop owner. This participant's dining room also has a study desk for her grandchildren to sit next to in the dining table. This configuration really allows her to chat with other family members while supervising her grandchildren when studying. So this is an example of overlapping of space between various activities. And then this is an example of participant IN01 who extend her eating settings during regular days when she receives visits from her family. So on regular days, she eats with her husband on a dining table. And then when her family are visiting, she extends the space, the eating space, by using mat on the floor so everyone can eat together on the mat. So some key findings of the first part is that the relationship between food-related activities is not always linear. And that IN participants engage in more frequent food-related activities than US participants, which could be influenced by labor participation, role in childcare, household size. Food-related activities of settings are influenced by both physical and social context, and then the connectivity between kitchen and dining room with the rest of residential unit create different cues to human behavior like visibility, privacy, and interactions in food-related activities. So moving on to the next one, looking at what are the challenges and strategies to maintain independence in food-related activities. So change can come internally from one's physiological conditions, and these are examples of physiological changes that participants experience, rooted in the declining physical and cognitive capacities. And then some examples like energy level, it relates to one's ability to sustain physical and mental activities. Participants noted that they get tired easily, so they have lower energy compared to their younger self. Memory and concentration is pretty common, the difficulty to remember and recall information as well as to maintain focus. And then contextual changes also happen beyond physiological changes, and these are some of the examples. I want to highlight one thing: children moving in or children moving out. It really changed the dynamics of food-related activities in the household. So changes can happen internally from one's physiological changes or from the environmental context. And these changes impact one's activity engagement. If one or combination of these changes interrupt PE interaction and activity demand relation, then it will create challenges. So challenges are results of changes that interrupt activity engagement. So these are some of the challenges that I found among food-related activities. Basically, every activity has certain demand to be fulfilled. When one life changes, it really depends on the activity demand. So I'm going to go through some examples: standing up for an extended period, cooking, preparing ingredients, cleaning, often conducted while standing up, as kitchen countertops and sinks are commonly designed for use in a stand-up position. So engagement in these activities demands one ability to stand up for an extended period, which is very difficult for someone who has declining strength and limited energy levels. And then storage spaces are often organized vertically. So to be able to store and retrieve items from the storage, one must be able to reach up or bend down. But again, limited flexibility creates challenges to do so. And then we want to learn how do they adapt, what are their strategies, which is essentially things that they do to connect this gap, which they've done to adaptation strategies. Basically, strategies are ways to adapt behavior and or environment to alleviate the challenges to do the activities as best as they can. I categorize participant strategies into behavioral and environmental. So behavioral are forms of adaptation to the method of conducting food-related activities. And these are some of the examples. And then environmental strategies are forms of adaptation to the space and tools. So this is the systems of settings. This presentation, I'm going to focus on the environmental strategies. So the first one is major layout renovation. So changing the layout of the kitchen and dining room to better accommodate food-related activities. This is an example of participant IN03. So she said the kitchen used to be a dining room. We used to eat here. And then right now the kitchen and the dining room are in one area. Back then, the kitchen was outside. Eventually, I decided to change the design and layout so I don't have to go back and forth. That's very exhausting. With the current layout and design, the kitchen and dining room are in one area, so I won't have to go back and forth anymore, and that's the first reason. The second reason is that when I do other things while cooking, I can still see the stove from here, from the front. So I remember if the kitchen is outside, I often forget what I'm doing. The next one is minor creative modifications. This is an example of participants US01. She said, I installed the aluminum foil layer to make it easier for me to clean up. You know, the oil splash from cooking will be everywhere when you cook. If it gets dirty, I remove the foil and throw it away and replace it with a new one. That's easier. I also found participants added furnitures or other objects to the interior space to address the activity demand. Here is participant US12 who added rugs on the floor between her island and kitchen counters. She said, because it's cold, that's one reason. And also there will be oil splash everywhere. So if you put the rugs on the floor, it will be easier to clean. The last two are hand in hand as both relates to storage organization strategy. So the frequency-based storage organization is like putting things that you use the most closer and easier to access, and then rarely used items on like the top shelves or other separate storage room. Then the further development of that is an open storage system, and some participants translated this by really having things hanging like nearby their stove, so they can quickly search and grab them while cooking, as shown here in the pictures. So some key findings for the second part is that physiological changes comes from physical cognitive capacity and also overall health conditions. Contextual changes are from physical and social environments. And the challenges are really the gap between the person-environment interaction and the demand of the activity that result from changes that interrupt those relationships. And then behavioral and built environmental strategies is the reconnection to the gap between person-environment interaction and activity demands. Going into the last part, so now we know that it's challenging, you know, some strategies are just a little difficult to do, but then I ask participants, like, why do you keep doing what you're doing? Like, what motivates you? So these are some of the motivations. Although adaptation is not straightforward, they choose to remain engaged in these activities. And these are their motivation. I'm going to go through the first one is that it brings them happiness. Food-related activities, particularly cooking, brings them pleasure and satisfaction. So as a hobby, they get personal pleasure and satisfaction, and then they also perceive food as their language of love and care, which give them a shared pleasure and satisfaction when they're seeing other people's happy when they're enjoying their food. The next motivation is staying healthy, pretty straightforward. You know, it provides healthy nourishments for you, but they also see this as a physical activity. You know, it's a kind of a form of exercise when they're moving around and physically active when doing all these things. Maintaining financial condition, you know, in both contexts, cooking is always cheaper than buying food outside. So, you know, they keep doing this because it helps them to maintain their financial condition. It can also be a source of income. This is unique for one participant. You know, during a COVID time, her husband just didn't have a lot of clients. So she just opened up a stall in front of her house and start cooking and selling the food. This one is interesting because I only found it among US participants. They don't want to bother other people. They perceive asking for help from others as bothering or like becoming a burden of others. They really tried their best not to ask for help unless they can no longer do it all. On the contrast, this is a finding only from IN participants. They want to fulfill their responsibility as women. They intend to live up to the societal expectation of women, which they describe as expecting women as wives, mothers, to be mainly responsible for most, if not all, household tasks. Interestingly, this is only found among participants who live in Indonesia, hinting that such societal expectations are firmly embedded among those who are geographically located in Indonesia. Lastly, they want to be role models, especially for their children. They want to set examples on how to run a household, and so their children can follow their values and practices. So these various motivations then led me to the latent meaning of activity that can convey identity, status, and power associated with these activities. Although the 4 food-related activities were discussed, a lot of the things are coming from the cooking activity. And as shown here, participants' motivations are tied to the multiple dimensions of participants' life. So from emotional, physical, financial, and social. And across the dimensions, participants perceive cooking from 2 angles. So cooking as process. The process focuses on cooking activity that relates to the inner self of participants, as well as the relationship with family and society at large. And then product focuses on food as the medium to attain, deliver, express different things from care, love, nourishments, money, and even identity. So cooking really more than just an activity of processing ingredients into cooked meals. The meaning of cooking are tied to the lens of process and product. The cooking process is an abstraction of the journey to maintain agency and preserve identity. And the product, cooking, is a concrete expression of one's agency and identity. So maintaining agency is about, generating the feeling of power and control. So being able to do these activities makes them feel powerful and have agency in their life. Through cooking, they have control over the food hygiene and compliance to any dietary restrictions or allergies. So it really influenced their preference to get help from others. They're more likely to accept help for preparing ingredients and cleaning and less for cooking activities. And I'll show you how it works in the settings. The first one, access, is really important. Having access to things really help them to feel in control, everything in their fingertips. As shown here, some of the frequently used items being easy to reach. The next one is connectivity. So having higher connectivity between kitchen and dining room really helps them to minimize movements, so then they can preserve energy. Next is openness. It allows older women to interact with other people or even guests, as shown here. So this participant often have guests sitting here while she's cooking, and these guests are like parents of her students who consult about their children. So they can do cooking and other activities at the same time. And then about identity, it relates to personal meaning that is formed through one's interpretation and collective culture. Cooking is also an avenue to communicate one's identity. They have pride in their food. They mention how their loved ones prefer their food over others. Sometimes when they buy takeout, they have to correct the taste. Preserving identity can be done in two ways, either sharing the taste, so sharing the food itself, or sharing the recipes. And the idea of sharing really hints the importance of other people. And I'll show you how these meanings are supported through kitchen. This participant often have her family coming over during special events to help her around the kitchen. So cooking together really allow her to share her recipe while socializing with the family. And this kitchen is very supportive because it has a large space for mobility, and also the island in the middle creates a circular path for mobility surrounding it. This participant loves to host cooking class specifically as her way to share recipe. So her kitchen is really supportive to the configuration needed for teaching others to cook, and clear visibility from the learner's perspective to everything that the instructor, does. So this is the last part, findings from the last part. Motivations to continue doing food-related activities are rooted in the physical, emotional, financial, and social fulfillment of life. Among other food-related activity, cooking gives the most meaning to life, contributing to older Indonesian women's well-being. And that being said, kitchen is really not just a space for food production. It's a space for older Indonesian women to maintain their agency and preserve their identity. So food-related activities is not just a basic instrumental activities, but they also have a lot of contribution to their sense of fulfillment and well-being. So next, from what I learned from participant stories, I propose these spatial characteristics. The first one is proximity. So having workspace that close to each other minimize unnecessary movements that may cause pain and energy, lengthen the process. Reachability is having items in places that don't require reaching too high or bending too low. And then match with the behavioral strategy of frequency-based storage items. Visibility is the cues to remember various tasks that they're managing simultaneously, also support when searching for items. The last one is honestly my personal favorite, is to provide temporary place to rest or to preserve energy and minimize pain. So consider counter space that with modifiable height, or prepare a space for storing chairs and stools around the stove and other preparation areas. So those are the basic things to continue doing things independently. But as I said, there's another value of kitchen as a spatial characteristics to maintain agency and preserve identity. So thinking about where is the place for guests and learners when they come in and doing all this teaching class and cooking together, cooking class and cooking together. And then thinking about the clear line of sight from the cook to multiple direction, paths for mobility, if possible, having a wide kitchen layout with an island, enough space for movements, and then connection with kitchen and dining area, and also area where they're hosting guests. So this is almost the last one. Obviously, this is a small study. It's bounded by so many different things, from a small sample size, the health and disabilities of participants, the geographical context, the social cultural characteristics, this being a remote study. So, and then the comprehensiveness of spatial informations. I have floor plans, but it's not without dimensions, and also my world US Indonesian woman immigrant in the US. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to close it as that kitchen is really not just a space for food production. It's also a space for older Indonesian women's agency and identity. And those are my two grandmas. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Widya. One of the things I'd like to say is that I've seen your dissertation content. Do you mind muting while I
Oh, sorry, yes.
No worries. One of the things that I'd like to say is that I've seen, over the last 2 years, the content evolve and the dissertation kind of grow. And it, every time I see it, I learn something new. And I think what you've created is both visually beautiful, and also the content is amazing. So thank you for sharing that with us today. I too was interested in the restability part, right? Like it was one of the notes that I wrote down, and I was wondering if within the environments that you saw, I mean, you're saying it's a recommendation for, helping older adults, but did you recognize that within the spaces that you recorded that they had restable, and was there a difference in geography? Was there like more resting in Indonesian women or in US immigrant women, or Indonesian immigrant women in the US? How did that go?
Yes, thank you, Drew, for the question. The recommendation about restability actually came from what I learned from their experiences. So they mentioned about, it's either some actually, first of all, Indonesian cuisine are complicated. It takes a lot of time to cook. So some of the strategies for those who kind of like, I'm okay, I don't have to kind of like use all the freshest ingredients and use like hands, and I can use tools and whatnot. They tend to, okay, maybe I just simplify the food. So that's the behavioral strategy. But some people go in the other direction. I'm like, I'm not compromising my method of cooking. So then what they do is like, I either do it on the dining table while sitting down. So I'm only standing up when I have to really be in front of the stove, and so, yeah, I see that participants have, sometimes I see stool in the kitchen. Sometimes I see like one of the dining table went missing, and then I see another photo in the kitchen. Some of those things are like, they mention like, this dining table, I use it for preparation as well. Regarding the differences between participants who are in Indonesia or in the US, yes. Indonesians are very, we like to sit on the floor. So first of all, that's why it's very uncommon for Indonesian households to keep their shoes when they're getting into the house. There's so many different reasons, because they pray on the floor and they bend down and whatnot. But another thing is because a lot of the cooking and eating and food preparation activities actually happening when they're sitting on the floor. They either, open a mat, like I show in that one participant's diagrams, and just sitting on the mat, or they have like little stool to just like kind of semi-squat position to clean up. So when they go back from the market and then like they do the preparation, they sit down on the floor and then do all the preparations. And some of the stove are like the old type stove where it's not necessarily on like a kitchen counter height. So that's also common that I found in not a lot of participants, but some of the participants do that. So the idea about restability is shared, but how is it manifested in the space is different because of the characteristics of kitchen in the US versus in Indonesia are different. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
I think we have a question on the chat from Heather. Do I foresee the widened kitchen to support guests to have an impact on elder Indonesian women's movability and proximity things in this space? Yes, I do see that. Yes, there is like make it things closer. So then, optimize, minimize unnecessary movements, but also widen the kitchen to support guests. But I think there is a middle ground to this, like I think the blending, the connectivity between like kitchen and the area where they host guests can be like a middle ground of that. I think it doesn't necessarily have to like that one participant when she has like a U type of like island and then like stools surrounding it. Yes, that's like she lives in the US, her house is big. So she has the ability to do that. But I think just as simple as maintaining a connection, like visible and audio connection between maybe the living room or whatever room is next to the kitchen, allow maintaining interaction with guests while doing things on the kitchen, and then the main area to do food preparation and cleaning and cooking can be optimized, not like too many spaces that they have to kind of walk too far. I hope that answers, Heather.
Great. Are there any other questions people would like to submit in the chat?
I have a questions. I am an Indonesian in the, hi Catherine, thank you for the questions. I'm an Indonesian in the US and I have seen many problems with using cooking oil. Can you talk about safety and recommendations for safety? Yes, I don't know if I will have I didn't really have time to specifically look at the safety and recommendations for safety and burns, yes, and disposing cooking oil. That's, yeah, I totally see that, being a source of problem. But one thing that it's unfortunately that's outside the scope of my study, but one thing that I can see from participants regarding the extensive use of cooking oil, because we like deep fried food, is the strategy to minimize cleaning burden. So that was the use of aluminum foil that I've shown in one participants, or like using, carpet, because it gets, oil splash and oil spill and whatnot, and becomes very slippery. So that's some of like the common strategies that participants have in terms of like minimizing the burden of cleaning and kind of like minimizing the risk of falling because of the extensive use of oil. But unfortunately, that's the only scope that I can remember at the moment. I haven't really, I didn't see any discussions about burns and disposal of cooking oil. So thank you for the question. Sorry, I can't really answer everything. Yes, thank you for, yeah, this study is, it's going to be part of the study is on process to be published in a book. Hope maybe in 2 years. Book takes longer, but I do have plans to publish it in journal publications, but not quite yet. Sorry, Drew, I'm kind of like taking over your job.
No, these, I mean,
the questions.
I can't answer the questions. So please feel free. Looks like there's one more.
Okay, one more question. Hi, Gabrielle. Thank you for your participation. Really inspiring to hear from a fellow Indonesian migrant. Yay. Knowing that I focus on older Indonesian women specifically, do I find that there is a trend or differences between age groups in their use of kitchen? Also wondering how this study would apply to young adults, although I know this is besides the study. Yes, I think one thing, I'm sure, Drew, you can chime in on this as well. When we're talking about older adults, we really don't rely on looking at the biological age per se, because it really doesn't tell anything. One approach, because I'm trained in human factors, so I tend to look at what are the barriers and what are the facilitators. So what can they do, and how they, what are the types of challenges that they face, and how do they behave change their behavior and change their environment to kind of continue doing that, or like forget it altogether, or like replace it with something else. So that's another theory of like compensation, or like, I can't remember on top of my head right now. So then I can't really answer the trend or differences between age groups in their use of kitchen space. But I can talk about when people are facing challenges. So, body change, we are all aging. There is a general trajectory of aging that maybe, a large part of the population will eventually experiencing the similar trend of trajectory of physical and cognitive decline. So we can approach it that way. So some of the challenges that I said, like feeling like there's lack of energy level, and then like lack of flexibility and reduced strength. So we can approach that from that end. And some of my participants are generally healthy with some of the common age-related challenges that they have. So in these participants, they're on a younger old group. So the strategies that I have about like restability and like proximity and visibility works. But then when we're looking at population who are later in the progression of age-related decline, then we have to think about combining built environmental strategies with care support. That's when we're talking about, family coming in, or even like professionals coming in to help them doing different things. And then, later again in the progression, maybe we start to discuss about, is staying at home alone is really a good option for them? And, because the discussion continues, depending on what can they do. And I think the easy kind of chart to understand is that the 3 levels that I went through really quickly, I'm sorry, the activities of daily living. So there's the basic activities of daily living. So those are the basic things for self-care. So you need to be able to eat, you need to be able to shower, you need to be able to use the toilet, you need to be able to change your clothes, you need to be able to move around. So if someone can't do this, then they're not leaving. So we really want to make sure that they're able to do this. People who are not able to do this by themselves, then they're really on a later stage where they need really a lot of intensive help. And then there's the instrumental activities of daily living. So things that are like helping you to be able to stay in your home. Obviously, you can do all the basics, and then are you able to maintain your house? Are you able to do your laundry? Are you able to cook your food and things like that? If this person cannot do that, maybe, have someone come and visit twice a week works best, and they can remain living in their own place if they wish. And then we're looking at, what about, the active adults and active older adults? Well, they can do all those basic and all the instrumental, and then we want to enhance their life even further. How do they do their hobby? How do they connect with the community? How do they use the technology so then they can talk to their grandchildren all the way in Indonesia who are living in the United States? So there's like different stages that usually I approach as a researcher, looking at what people need based on the challenges that they have. So
That was great, Widya. Thank you. We have just a couple more minutes. If anybody wanted to add any other notes or questions. Great. Well, I'll use the time to say that I know that it was asked earlier, but the session was recorded. The AIA Chicago will have the video available, I believe, on Monday was the anticipated goal. Great. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you for your time, Widya, and thank you everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Drew and Madison, for inviting me. Oh, I could